Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, analysis of the Hindu and Indian Express from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 24th of December 2022. Before we begin, there is a quick announcement. There is not going to be any DNS tomorrow, which is 25th of December, and hence a very happy Christmas to all of us. Apart from that, you should know that the test series for prelims as well as test series for PSI or optional has been launched. So do not miss any opportunity to subscribe to these two test series. Let us now move on to the discussion. The first news that we have taken appears on page number 1. 81 crore people to get free food grains for 1 year. Those covered under National Food Security Act will benefit. Center to bear the entire expense estimated at around 2 lakh crore. Food Minister terms it another remarkable decision of the government. Now we know the mechanism through which these food grains are acquired by the government is the mechanism of minimum support prices or MSP. Now MSP or minimum support prices is one of the ways through which government tries to incentivize agriculture to keep the farmer afloat and to remunerate for his or her hard work. At the same time, the grains acquired at MSP is actually the grain which is distributed under PDS or Public Distribution System. Now this topic is very important from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination. For example, in 2019, UPSC had asked the economic cost of food grains to the Food Corporation of India is minimum support price and bonus if any paid to farmers plus A. Transportation cost only, B. Interest cost only, C. Procurement incidentals and distribution cost, and D. Procurement incidentals and charges for godowns. Now I'm not going to tell you the answer because the answer lies in the discussion. Not just that, the public distribution system also forms the part of GS paper 3 under main syllabus because issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support prices, public distribution system objectives, functioning, limitation and revamping is a part of your syllabus. And UPSC sticks to syllabus because again in 2019, UPSC had asked what are the reformative steps taken by the government to make food grain distribution system more effective. So you can see that this topic is important for both the stages of examination, prelims as well as the main stage. And so go through this discussion where we are going to start by first understanding the mechanism or the framework through which the grain is finally delivered on the gates of the beneficiaries. And then finally, what are the challenges which the public distribution system is facing. And try to solve this previous year question in prelims and mains and see if you were able to do that with this discussion. And so let us now first understand how does a bag of grains reaches the beneficiary starting from a farm. We know that farmers do not directly go to the beneficiary. That is not an option, right? And so it exchanges a lot of hand before it ends up in the hands of beneficiary. And so of course, the first stage in the long chain of events is done by FCI, which is called procurement of grains. Food Corporation of India exchanges these grains in return of minimum support price or MSP. So the food of grain is given to FCI and in return, FCI gives the farmer MSP. And this MSP is paid and declared by the central government. And so at the first stage, the ownership to the grains is acquired by an agency of central government. But we know that they have to end up in the hands of beneficiaries. And so it is important for them to be acquired by the state governments. And that is the second stage of this long chain of events. So in the second stage, the food grains are allocated to the states depending upon the number of beneficiaries that they have in their respective states. Now the question is, does FCI charges any money from the state governments? And so the answer is yes. Food Corporation of India is not going to give away the food grains, lakhs and lakhs tons of these food grains for free to state governments. And it charges some amount in return from state governments, which is what is known as CIP or Central Issue Price, the price at which the food grains are allocated to the states. So now you can clearly see what FCI spends for getting that food grain is MSP, but what it gets in return is CIP. But the grains are still not at the door of beneficiaries because the grains are still lying in the godowns of the state government, from where they are allocated to the fair price shops These fair price shops are the last linkage between the state government and the final beneficiary. From here, the beneficiary take up their allocation of food grains at central issue price, exact price which the state had paid to the FCI. And so this is a whole framework through which our public distribution system operates. From this point beyond, if someone asks you what is minimum support price or MSP, and so you are going to confidently say that MSP is a price at which the food grains are bought from farmers, and hence it is the price which is paid to the farmers. It is paid by FCI, but it is recommended by CACP or Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices, and it is of course declared by central government. Whereas central issue price is a price at which food grains are allocated to states. At the same time, beneficiary also pays central issue price in return of food grains over here. Now there is one more perspective about MSP which you should know, which is that MSP, of course every one of us understands, is about ensuring a minimum support price to farmer, or in other words, ensuring at least some amount of income to the farmers. But at the same time, it is also about the food subsidy burden of the central government. Because higher the MSP, higher is the amount of money which the central government has to invest on acquiring that food grain. Now, whenever we talk about the food subsidy bill of the central government, we always read one thing: it is increasing. It keeps on increasing always. And why is that? Because people will say that FCI is spending MSP, but in return it is getting CIP. And so why is it a burden on central government? And so, if you have to calculate food subsidy expenditure of the central government, the first and foremost will be minimum support price, which it gives to the farmers, which is an expenditure. In return, it gets central issue price from the states, which is what they get in return, which is what FCI gets in return. At the same time, there are few other expenses on behalf of the central government. For example, when the food grain is acquired from the farmers, it is kept in godowns and silos, and it is transported to the state governments and their godowns, and all that cost is borne by the central government. So on behalf of the central government, the expenses are MSP plus transportation and storage costs, which is additional cost, and what they are earning in this exchange is central issue price. Now, if you look at the framework which governs our public distribution system at present, which is National Food Security Act or NFSA, the central issue prices have been fixed for a very, very long time. So for example, if you go and check on these prices, the prices of wheat, rice and various other products have been fixed at rupees 1, 2 and 3 and not more than that. Whereas what you read in newspaper is that government has increased MSP. And this happens every harvesting season. And so on one hand, MSP keeps on increasing because the income to the farmer has to increase. On the other hand, CIP remains fixed. So what the central government is spending on food subsidy keeps on increasing because what it is earning is constant, and it is very, very small as compared to the MSP. The comparison is right there on your screen, and see how MSP has kept on increasing in past 20 years, whereas CIP is same, and hence the bloating food subsidy expenditure. So now we have understood the framework. But we have still not gone through the legal backing behind this framework. There has to be a legal arrangement which provides for this kind of acquisition, procurement, and then finally giving out these food grains to the beneficiaries. Now, some of you might think that it is dealt by National Food Security Act, but that is not true. Now, the basic framework through which the public distribution system in our country operates is derived from Essential Commodities Act. Because Essential Commodities Act 1955 gives the central government powers to do certain special things. Utilizing the provisions of this act, the central government came out with Public Distribution System Control Order 2001, which regulates the prices, cultivation of crops, its storage and distribution, and how it is going to be done. So the basic framework of PDS, the basic framework through this part of the chain operates, is determined by PDSCO 2001 order derived from Essential Commodities Act 1955. Then a very, very important Supreme Court judgment, PUCL versus Union of India 2001 judgment, under which Supreme Court of India ruled that right to food will be covered under right to life and personal liberty of Article 21. And from other DNS discussions, you might be aware how Supreme Court has from time to time expanded the ambit of Article 21. And this is one such judgment which actually expanded the meaning of life and liberty in our country. And finally, in 2013, government came up with National Food Security Act, which actually legalized the right to food. Now, what National Food Security Act did was that it converted a very vague and general entitlement of the citizens of our country, backed by an executive order, into a proper statutory right, which was very, very important. And so whatever is written in red color is your problem with the PDS. Centralized procurement, government is a major buyer, so issues related to monopolistic tendencies, the changes in the cropping pattern which it has brought in its wake, higher procurements than needed, which then leads to lack of storage spaces, and then finally challenges with the distribution system. So these are the major challenges which the PDS is facing as of right now. And so let us now start with the problem number 1, which is centralized procurement. So currently the procurement is centralized in the sense that almost all the grain currently is acquired on MSP by the Food Corporation of India, or in other words, the central government. And so there is no role for states or state governments in the way the grains are being procured. And this of course leads to very, very high transportation costs. And now the question is, why does centralized procurement leads to higher transportation costs? Now you have to understand that when the FCI acquires food grain from a particular area or a district, it goes to the central storage facility of FCI. But in the same area, there are poor people who are going to get the grain back as well. And so this you can see is unnecessary transport of grain from point A to B and then back to point A, which then of course results in very, very high transportation cost. It's just not us, government has also realized this problem, and so it has come up with decentralized procurement system, under which the central government has actually delegated the power of procurement to a lot of state governments, where they can acquire the food grains on their own and the central government is there to watch their backs. And the next important problem is a major problem, and that is a problem in all those commodities and markets where there is a single major player. In this case, it's Government of India, because Government of India is the major buyer in food grain market. And more often than not, the MSP which the government offers to the farmers is way higher than the prevailing market prices, which of course motivates the farmers to sell almost all the food grains, or at least try for it, to the Food Corporation of India, rather than selling it into the open market, which then results in artificial scarcity of those food grains. And for that, Government of India has come up with Open Market Sale Scheme and Price Stabilization Fund. Now under the Open Market Sale Scheme, whatever excess the Food Corporation of India has procured in a particular financial year is sold in the open market at the prevailing prices, which then of course increases the supply of these food grains, reducing their prices in the market. As far as Price Stabilization Fund is concerned, the government has constituted it to control the elevated prices of grains. So whenever the government feels that a price of a certain commodity has increased a lot, now as far as Price Stabilization Fund is concerned, its purpose is just opposite. So open market sale is to bring down a price of certain commodity by increasing the supply, whereas Price Stabilization Fund is a fund which will be utilized when the prices of certain commodity or agriculture commodity for which the MSP is given has gone down. So the government utilizes that fund to acquire or procure extra grain from the market. This acquisition on behalf of the government increases the demand and hence the prices. Now currently, the food grains like rice and wheat are not covered under Price Stabilization Fund, but there is a recommendation to include rice and wheat also under this Price Stabilization Fund regime. Then the next problem which the PDS has brought in its wake is that it has induced monoculture or cropping or cultivation of single variety of food grain in a large area. So it has impacted the cropping pattern in our country. And the obvious reason is that farmers are more likely to take up only those food grains and crops for which they can be assured of assured return, which is MSP. And so, due to the MSP regime, due to the PDS, all those crops for which the MSP is not offered have actually gone out of cropping pattern. As a result of the reforms, the government of India has now tried to include more and more crops under the MSP regime so that more and more crops can get equal treatment as far as the prices are concerned and they do not go out of cropping pattern. Then the next problem with the way PDS functions is a higher procurement, higher than what is needed, which then leads to build-up of massive stocks in the godowns of Food Corporation of India. And the reason behind that is open-ended procurement policy of the government of India. Now, what open-ended procurement policy does is that it makes it an obligation on behalf of Food Corporation of India to buy all those food crops for which the government releases MSP if a farmer approaches. It doesn't matter what the target is. It doesn't matter how much they have acquired, but if a farmer comes at the gate of the godowns of Food Corporation of India with, let's say, a bag of rice, they have to acquire it, and this is what it leads to the massive buildup of the stocks in the godowns. And so there has been a growing demand to scrap this open-ended procurement policy. So we have understood that there are higher procurement which leads to massive stocks. This buildup of massive stocks create the problem of lack of storage space. And this obviously results in wastage because there is not enough space in the godowns of Food Corporation of India. And even if there is a space, after all, it is a government company which does not store the food grains in the most scientific way in which they should be stored, which then results in rotting. And for exactly this, the government of India has come up with Private Entrepreneurs Guarantee Scheme, under which the government of India is incentivizing entrepreneurs to come up with godowns, technologically advanced godowns in rural areas. They are being provided with various kinds of incentives to set up godowns. Now, what this is going to do is that first, FCI is going to store the food grains very safely and securely in these godowns. The creation of these godowns in turn is going to have multiplier effect in the areas surrounding, not just creating employment but also enhancing the infrastructure of our rural areas. And then finally, the problem is at the distribution level, the last mile delivery, the point from where the food grain is actually distributed from fair price shops to the final beneficiary. And you must have read in the newspaper about how the people who are entitled are not getting the food grains, which is called exclusion error, because they were wrongly excluded from the list of people who are supposed to get the food grains. Whereas there are a lot of people who get the food grains, but they were not entitled for that, which is called inclusion error. They were wrongly included into the list, and our PDS system has both kinds of error, which is not what we want. Because in both the cases, the food subsidy and the benefits is ending up with the wrong person. In one case, the right person is not getting it, and in the second case, the wrong person is getting it. Now, in this regard, the government of India has already started the work where they have tried to do end-to-end computerization of the whole PDS supply chain. But still, there is a need for online allocation of food grains, digitization of ration cards, and not just digitization, there is a need of complete seeding of these ration cards with Aadhaar. Also, it is time for us to think creatively as far as subsidy and food subsidy transfer is concerned. There is a need for the government to explore direct benefit transfer or DBT for food subsidy. For example, instead of giving the food, equal amount of cash can be transferred into the beneficiary's account. It has been tried, but it has its associated challenges with it. Then we know that government is already implementing one nation, one ration card, so that when a person migrates from one locality or one state to another, she is not deprived of her right to food. Russia and India can help in reviving intra-Afghan dialogue says Zamir Kobilov, who is a Moscow's special representative and is also the longest serving Kremlin official in Afghanistan. He says that the Taliban's counter-terror measures are insufficient, but they deserve tribute, and that the regional countries are willing to help the Taliban defeat the security threats. He further said that it is not correct for United Nations to allow the representatives of the previous Afghan government to continue to occupy the chair of the permanent representative of Afghanistan at United Nations. So there are two things which emerge out of the statement given by a Russian politician. First is that it hints towards nudging India into interacting with Taliban, and not just that, it says that both Russia and India can help reviving intra-Afghan dialogue, the dialogue among various communities in which the current Afghan politics and society is fragmented into. And if you are wondering how is this connected to your UPSC syllabus, if you look at GS paper 2 under IR, India and its neighborhood relation is a part of your syllabus. Afghanistan is our neighbor. Apart from that, effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests is also a part of his syllabus. Now, whatever has happened in Afghanistan has happened because of the interaction of Afghanistan and Taliban with US. And so, it is very, very important to understand India-Afghan ties in last 20-25 years. And for that, we will go through a very quick revision of history from 1985's the American encouragement to the fundamentalist forces in the Middle East, and to the current, what are the reasons which force India to engage with Taliban, but still there are challenges which need to be resolved. Let us now begin the discussion. So Taliban came to power in Afghanistan actually in 1996, but their emergence can be traced way back from early 1990s and late 1980s, when the USA had propped up fundamentalist forces across the Middle East in order to counter the growth of communism in this region. Taliban was one such fundamentalist Wahhabi force, which was initially fronted by USA to counter the increasing influence of USSR. And so the withdrawal of USSR directly made Taliban one of the most important militia in Afghanistan. And so after a long civil war which ended in 1996, Taliban came to state power. Although it was not recognized by many countries as the legitimate state power, but still it commanded power from 1996 to 2001. After coming to power in 1996, Taliban imposed strict version of Sharia, which included the public execution and banning of women from public life. The next turning point in the modern history of Afghanistan came in 2001. We all know that 9/11 terrorist attack took place on USA, and US along with its NATO allies led a military campaign against Al-Qaeda and Taliban government. Although the attack was conducted by Al-Qaeda, but Al-Qaeda terrorist organization was harbored and given space and resources by the Taliban government, and hence it became important for USA to dismantle the Taliban government. And this continued for 20 years. In 2005, elected Afghan government replaced the Taliban and most human development indicators were improved. However, nearly one-third of Afghanistan was still contested and was being ruled by Taliban. This was the time when India and Afghanistan relations saw the highest amount of interaction. This was also the time when, because the ruling government of Afghanistan was pro-India supported by USA and NATO, India's investment peaked and surged. These investments included Afghanistan's parliament building in Kabul, reconstruction of Salma Dam, Afghan-India Friendship Dam, also otherwise known as Afghan-India Friendship Dam, construction of Zaranj-Delaram Road, High Impact Community Development Program or HICDP. This was also the time when transfer of various objects like ambulances, buses, biscuits, medicine, military vehicles and helicopters took place. Apart from that, key highlighting feature of this duration was people-to-people interaction, where Indian government offered scholarships to Afghan students and facility for their higher education. And apart from that, Indian government offered and organized training for Afghan soldiers, policemen and other public servants. But this phase did not long last for India, because as we know, in 2020, US and Taliban signed landmark deal in Doha to end the war in Afghanistan and allow US troops to return home. and in 2021, after the withdrawal of the US, Taliban recaptured Kabul and began their offensive. And because of which, the dilemma whether India should full-fledgedly engage with Taliban, and if it should, what are the challenges that still going to mar India-Afghanistan relation, Afghanistan which is headed by or controlled by Taliban. Now, if we look into the reasons which compel or which makes for a complete sense for India to engage with Taliban, number one is that Taliban is gaining legitimacy across the globe. We have seen rising international engagement of other countries with Taliban. So, for example, India has so far focused only on the isolating Taliban, because this has been the traditional stand of India even when the Taliban ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. Because that was the time when the Kashmir insurgency was at peak, and we found out that most of the terrorists entering into Kashmir from Pakistan were being trained under the patronage of Taliban. And so that thinking of Indian security establishment and political leadership has continued. However, beyond a point, this option will yield diminishing returns. This idea of isolating Taliban is not going to help India much, as many other countries are starting new engagement with Taliban, and India, of course, is an important stakeholder in Afghanistan. So, for example, 14 nations had opened their missions in Kabul in initial 6 months of their taking over the power. And so, if India still continues with its old strategy of isolating Taliban, it's not going to work. Apart from that, Taliban is very, very important to counter Pakistan's hegemony, Pakistan's dominance within Afghanistan. While no one can deny the fact that Pakistan remains a pivotal player even today, but its influence and control over Taliban will be determined by how much presence other countries, including India, have within Afghanistan. So, for example, if India isolates from Taliban, does not interact with the Afghani people, does not invest any money in the infrastructure, of course, Pakistan will continue to hold dominance, but only when India starts interacting, just like it did during the regime of earlier Afghan government, supported by the Western power, can India hope to counter Pakistan. And so, a view that has gained ground in Indian establishment is that it is time to de-hyphenate Pakistan from Taliban, especially in this scenario. De-hyphenation means decoupling. So India cannot put Pakistan as a condition while in its interaction with the Taliban. So India cannot dictate to Taliban that unless and until you stop interacting with Pakistan, we won't interact with you. These two have to be decoupled. Just like we have expected US to decouple India-US ties, the globe has decoupled Israel-Palestine relations. They are now interacting individually to both these nations. And so, it is time for India to de-hyphenate its interactions with Afghanistan. Apart from that, if you look, good relations with Afghanistan is extremely crucial for our national security as well. Because Afghanistan in past provided space to terror groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Apart from that, Taliban also has ties with Lashkar-e-Toiba and terrorist organizations like Jaish-e-Mohammed. And so, an engagement with Taliban would give an opportunity to convey Indian concerns directly and encourage those elements within the group who wish to open up its diplomatic choices. And so, it is important and extremely crucial for India to have good ties if and only if national security were to be our concern. But then there are a lot of other benefits which are mutually reciprocal, which are to be gained with good relations between India and Afghanistan. For example, Taliban encouraged India to reopen its mission in Kabul, which India did. But of course, it's devoid of any consular services of now. So the two countries have resumed direct flights between Kabul and New Delhi, which it did, and also accepted Afghan military trainees which were trained in India. And so this shows that there is a lot of scope for mutual coordination. Apart from that, we should never forget that Taliban in power are more divided than they were as a fighting force. Because when they were fighting against an imperialistic force in the form of NATO led by US. But now they are in the power and they do not have a common enemy or opposition which they can fight, and hence they are divided into a lot of factions, and that this situation may provide room for a layered political and diplomatic engagement with different actors. So Taliban right now has a lot of factions, some of which are also pro India and anti Pakistan. By not interacting with Taliban at all, we are not only dividing these factions of supporters but also ensuring that the cause of India in Afghanistan is lost forever. Apart from that, India had built up huge and strong people to people connection for 15 years when the NATO supported Afghan government existed. And so Indian outreach to Taliban will help it reconnect with Afghan people, a link that snapped after Taliban takeover in late August. But although the reasons for higher level of engagement between India and Taliban can be as compulsive as they can be, but no one can deny the existence of challenges to such engagements. The first and foremost challenge between deeper India and Taliban engagement is the inconsistency of India's policy towards Taliban. Because India has always supported an Afghan led, Afghan owned, and Afghan controlled process for enduring peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. It involved acting engagement with the elected Afghan government and isolation of Taliban. And now, when Taliban has gained the complete control, it has become very difficult for India to take a U turn on the stated policy. But this not ends there. The way Taliban has operated and kept its ties intact with a lot of terrorist organizations has led India to think over its security concerns. For example, India continues to face threat from terrorist factions such as Haqqani group, which is a key member of Taliban. Also, recently a UN Taliban monitoring committee report shows that terror groups are continuing to find safe haven on Afghan soil with the Taliban support. Apart from that, the kind of actions that the Taliban has taken after coming to power in 2021 or 22, has led the world to believe that their ideological commitment to the kind of Islam that they follow is total and complete, and there is no rethinking on that. So, Taliban has not changed from its previous medievalism. Attacks on minorities are continuing, and restrictions on women have been reinforced, from not being allowed to attend school to curbs on free movement in public spaces and at work. And this is in conflict with India's ethos and may create negative perception of India for Afghan people. And finally, Tajikistan has emerged as one of the important challenges when dealing with Afghanistan. As India increases its engagement with Taliban, it would need to redefine its relationship with Tajikistan, as it has deeply adversarial relation with Kabul and has moved very close to Beijing in past decade. China today is Tajikistan's biggest debt holder and its biggest investor. Also, Dushanbe is supporter of Chinese repressive policies against Sunni Uyghur Muslim community, and so they have found a big coherence in policies among themselves. Alleviating the scourge of private healthcare. According to the author, India ranks poorly on multiple health financing indicators. Its public health expenditure stands approximately at around 1.28% of the GDP. And share of general government expenditure dedicated to health stands at around 4.8%, which is almost equivalent to poorest countries. Per capita health spending has not taken pace with the rising incomes, and it stands dismally low and plateaus. Private spending still continues nearly 60% of overall expenditure on health. So if 100 rupees is being spent on health, 60 comes from the individual in the form of out of pocket expenditure or OOPE. Whereas if you look at this figure in developed countries, it is very, very low, because there a lot of funding, a lot of spending, a lot of expenditure is coming itself from the government and not from the individual itself. And according to the author, the main reason behind this is dominant role of private healthcare sector. And because of the withdrawal of the government or lack of the attention from the government on healthcare infrastructure in India, private healthcare system has tried to replace it, especially in the rural areas. In rural areas, we have primary healthcare or at best somewhere secondary healthcare system or hospitals by the government, but we know what is the pathetic situation of these hospitals, and hence the residents do not have any option but to seek resort to the private doctors and private nursing homes. But the problem is that there are marked inequities between rural and urban areas, and there is a widespread market failure where the products and services are not priced as per the demand. And hence, the priority of the government should be to create organized networks of providers like health maintenance organization which can be regulated easily. Apart from that, high cost of medical education, especially the medical education from private hospitals and colleges, triggers the vicious cycle of cost recovery. You have paid 1 crore to get an MBBS degree, of course you're going to recover it. And especially if your hospital lies in rural area, there's no one to actually test the kind of charges that you are levying on the patients. Most small clinics are being run by proxy doctors or quacks in rural areas who do not even have the proper medical degree to pursue such a novel career. Apart from few large brands, private hospitals have remained aloof to new research and development. So these are the major issues plaguing the private sector, because of which disproportionately vast number of people are every day being ill treated or mistreated in these sectors. And it does not end there. Lack of ethical management has called for many hospitals adopting illegal trading practices. There is no answerability of private sector to government regulatory board over their functioning and operations. Apart from that, private healthcare providers are rarely interested in provision of preventive care. So these are the major issues, according to the author, which plague the current private healthcare infrastructure in our country. And so, what can we suggest as a way forward? So, according to the author, what can be immediately done is the regulation of product and services, but always keeping in mind that private venture is always motivated by profit, so profit should not be denied, but disproportionate fleecing of the patient should be denied. Apart from that, we should create health maintenance organization, which is a network or organization that provides health insurance coverage for a monthly or annual fee. Apart from that, incentivizing new innovations that could reduce down the cost of operations, for example, cheaper tools. And just not ends there, creation of local boards, local representations to look into the services and costs provided by the private hospitals, which will enforce the local accountability. So these are some of the recommendations when it comes to alleviating the scourge of private health care. These two news articles are interrelated. Session ends in Rajya Sabha amid din over Vice President's remark on Sonia, and Lok Sabha winter session cut short after floor leaders' consensus. In both the cases, we can see that in case of Rajya Sabha, Mr. Vice President, and in case of Lok Sabha, Mr. Speaker, have adjourned the meeting of both the houses. Now, from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination, both the houses of parliament and the procedures related to their proceedings are very, very important, and hence it is important for us to cover Article 85 first. Sessions of Parliament, prorogation and dissolution. Before we move ahead, it is important for us to understand the difference between adjournment, adjournment sine die, prorogation and dissolution. So adjournment suspends the work in a sitting for a specified time, which may be hours, days or weeks. In this case, the time of reassembly is mandatorily specified. Whereas if you look at adjournment sine die, which is written as it means terminating a sitting of parliament for an indefinite period. In other words, when the house is adjourned without naming a day for reassembly, it is called adjournment sine die. The power of adjournment sine die lies with the presiding officer of the house. Whereas prorogation means the terminating of a session of the house by an order made by the President under Article 85 Clause 2A. Prorogation terminates both the sitting and the session of the House. Whereas if we talk about dissolution, it ends the very life of the existing house and a new house is constituted after general elections are held. And so, Rajya Sabha cannot be dissolved, whereas Lok Sabha is dissolved as and when if it is recommended by the Council of Ministers or when it completes its term of 5 years. So, Article 85 says that the President shall from time to time summon each House of Parliament to meet at such time and place as he thinks fit. But 6 months shall not intervene between its last sitting in one session and the date appointed for its first sitting in the next session. Which basically means that the constitution does not specify the number of time the houses shall meet, but it says that there shall not be a gap of more than 6 months, which means they have to meet at least twice every year. And president may from time to time prorogue, now we understand the meaning of prorogue, the houses of either house or dissolve the house of people. And you can see the word dissolution comes only with the house of people and not with the council of states, which is Rajya Sabha. So when it comes to conduct of business by parliament, duration between the sessions ordinarily meet 3 sessions in a year, and these are the budget session, monsoon session and the winter session. However, the Constitution of India, as we know, does not mention about the different sessions of parliament. The president shall from time to time summon each house of parliament, but 6 months shall not intervene, which we have seen. There's also a special address by the president, which happens at the commencement of the first session after each general election to the House of People and at the commencement of first session of each year. So whenever a new Lok Sabha will meet for the first time, irrespective of which session it is, the president shall address. And apart from that, at the commencement of first session of each year, the president lays down the agenda of the government. The president shall address both houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, assembled together and inform parliament the causes of its summons. Now, there are few things which we should know, that the adjournment of a house does not terminate the session of the house. It merely postpones the proceeding of the house to a future date. But prorogation brings an end to a session of the house. Adjournment sine die refers to the adjournment of House of People for an indefinite period without assigning any specific day or date for its reconvening. The power of adjournment sine die lies with the presiding officer of the House, in case of Rajya Sabha chairman, in case of Lok Sabha speaker. Bharat's biotech nasal COVID vaccine available as booster. With the threat of COVID-19 resurfacing and India ramping up health surveillance measures, Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia said on Friday that a vaccine which could be administered as a nasal drops would henceforth be available for public use. And from the perspective of science and technology, it is important for us to understand few basic stuff. A nasal vaccine is delivered through the nose or mouth. Unlike the earlier vaccines which were injected into our blood system, it is expected to work on the mucosal lining, prompting an immune response at the entry points of the virus in the human body. It likely prevents the infection at the entry site itself, thereby also blocking its spread. Scientists have called this sterilizing immunity. Early studies showed that nasal delivery of this vaccine creates a strong immune response throughout the body, especially in the nose and respiratory tract. It is world's first intranasal vaccine approved for this particular purpose. When talking about key attributes, an intranasal vaccine stimulates a broad immune response, neutralizing the antibodies IgG, mucosal IgA, and T cell responses. Immune responses at the site of infection, which is the nasal mucosa, is essential for blocking both infection and transmission of COVID-19. The nasal route has excellent potential for vaccination due to the organized immune system of the nasal mucosa. It's non-invasive, which means it does not require any penetration of the body, and it's needle-free, and so psychologically also it's not a deterrent as compared to other vaccines. Ease of administration is one thing which is of great advantage when it comes to nasal vaccine, and so it does not require trained healthcare workers to be administered. Elimination of needle associated risks like injuries and infection is also eliminated, and it will definitely account for high compliance and hence ideally suits for children and adults. And it's a scalable manufacturing is something which comes very naturally for the situation like India. The last article for today's discussion has appeared on editorial, Fighting Cancer, and talks about human papilloma virus. Now, human papilloma virus is something that we have already discussed, and so we will use just that clip because there is nothing new about HPV. The last article for today's discussion is a lead article appearing on page number 6, The Debilitating Side Effect of a Flawed Vaccine Trial, where author talks about a vaccine trial or the clinical trial of vaccine of a disease which is known as human papilloma virus or HPV, and how that botched up vaccine trial was conducted in Andhra Pradesh over 23,500 girls between the age group of 10 to 14. And then author draws correlation with that vaccine trial with that of COVID-19 vaccine trial which is going on right now. But we have already discussed this topic in our Daily News Simplified as to what are the consequences, or rather the negative consequences of conducting trials phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in such a short manner of time, and also giving approval to vaccine without paying heed to the proper data being submitted by the agency which has invented or which is manufacturing the vaccines. In this particular discussion, we are going to discuss some basics about human papilloma virus. Now, why we are going to discuss that is because UPSC keeps on frequently asked questions on diseases either which are in news or which are very important and impact a lot of people in our society. Case in point is a question which was asked in 2019, which one of the following statements is not correct. Hepatitis B virus is transmitted much like HIV. Hepatitis B, unlike hepatitis C, does not have a vaccine. Globally, the number of people infected with hepatitis B and C viruses are several times more than those infected with HIV. And finally, some of those infected with hepatitis B and C viruses do not show symptoms for many years. Although the right answer was B, so this particular statement is incorrect. All of them are correct. But what are the important takeaways from this particular previous year question? The importance is that you need to know about important diseases with respect to their transmission mode or how they are transmitted from one person to another. You also need to know whether they have vaccines, which is a way to prevent the disease, or treatment. And you are also expected to know about their symptoms. And so, human papilloma virus is one of the most commonly sexually transmitted infection, and hence it becomes important. So it is an infection that's passed between people through skin to skin contact, and it's so common that most sexually active people will get some variety of it at some point, even if they have few sexual partners. An interesting aspect of HPV is that some cases, or in most cases, it does not causes any health problems, but as we will see, it might lead to cancer as well. And so some types of HPV can lead to development of genital warts and even cancers of cervix, anus and throat. So as we have discussed in a previous year question that we need to understand the transmission mode of any important virus, and so the virus that causes HPV is transmitted through skin to skin contact. So just like HIV virus is transmitted through some of the bodily fluids, this one is transmitted through skin to skin mode. And so most people get a genital HPV infection through direct sexual contact, including vaginal, anal and oral sex. Many people have HPV and don't even know about it. And so that is why it keeps on transmitting within the society, which means you can still contract it even if your partner does not have any symptoms. It's also possible to have multiple types of HPV in a single person, and you must know that there are around 100 types of HPV virus. In rare cases, a mother who has HPV can transmit the virus to her baby during delivery. When this happens, the child may develop a condition called recurrent respiratory papillomatosis, where they develop HPV related warts inside their throat or even airways. So what are the common symptoms of HPV? And so often HPV infection does not causes any noticeable symptom or health problems. In fact, 90% of HPV infections go away on their own within 2 years, and this data has been given by CDC. However, because the virus is still in a person's body during this time, that person may transmit this virus to other people. And so the problem becomes chronic when the viruses don't go away on its own, and that is when they cause serious health problems. These include genital warts and warts in throat. In some cases, HPV can also cause cervical cancer and other cancers of genital, head, neck, and even throat. The types of HPV that cause warts are different from the types that cause cancer. So having genital warts caused by HPV does not mean that you will develop cancer. And so cancers caused by HPV often don't show symptoms until the cancer is in later stages of growth. And so that is where the role of regular screening comes into play in effective diagnosis of HPV. And so finally, it is important to know about the treatments and prevention. Just like most other viruses, the treatments are symptomatic, and so genital warts can be treated with prescription medications, burning with an electrical current, or freezing with liquid nitrogen. But you should always remember that these are just symptomatic treatments, and so getting rid of physical warts does not treat the virus itself, and so the warts may keep on recurring. If we talk about the cancer, precancerous cells may be removed by the doctor, and cancers may be treated just like other cancers are treated through chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and surgery. A good news is that there is a vaccine known by the name of Gardasil 9 which is available for prevention of genital warts and cancer caused by HPV. But the easiest way to prevent HPV are to use condoms and practice safe sex. So these are some of the important information related to human papilloma virus from the perspective of prelims examination. Let's now move on to the question of the day.